Georgia has 9.8% economic growth, which is indeed very sexy.
Don't read Soviet newspaper before your lunch. So I don't believe in these statistics.
Bank of Georgia's stock rose by 50% or over 50% in the last 6 month period and almost 70% for a year.
They are standing on a ground. So if this is a solid rocky ground, then everything looks pretty nice. If this is a quicksand, things look very much diametrically opposite.
Do they have any leverage to push back on the decisions that they deem to be political?
Jerry runs, or Tom runs, out of a cliff and he's continuing running in the open air until he realizes that he's in the air. So this is kind of a situation, and I think there could be an abrupt fall.
Hello and welcome to Talk Georgia. It's my English podcast covering Georgian and regional politics. Talk Georgia is brought to you by Droeba Media Group, a trusted source of high-quality news and analytical media content, and GSAC, a think tank providing comprehensive political analysis of Georgia and wider Black Sea region, also academic and practical training for postgraduate students and mid-career professionals. To dive into the key developments of Georgian politics and also business and finances, today we're privileged to be joined by Nika Shurgaia, an economist, financier, manager, advisor, video blogger, activist and cleaner, as he calls himself, or chief cleaner of Georgia. So later on we'll ask about details of this, why he calls himself cleaner. But Nika has over 30 years of experience in financial and banking sectors. He held top executive and advisory positions in Georgia and away from Georgia. He graduated from London Business School and he's Master of Business Administration. He studied finances at Tbilisi State University. At the moment, if I'm not mistaken, he is founder and runs Sadagi, a non-for-profit organization that takes care of Georgia's nature and environment. Well, this is the group of people that organize themselves and clean beautiful but otherwise littered Georgia's beautiful resorts. Okay, Mr. Shurgaia, welcome to my show. Please feel free to add anything you would like to your biography, or maybe you give us a bit more information about your day-to-day activities.
Georgi, it's a real pleasure to be with you. Thank you for this really flattering introduction. I would say a few words about the cleaner, which is, you can call it also a sorter, which is derived from this organization, Georgia Cleaners Guild. So a few friends and I have founded in 2021, and its key purpose is to raise awareness about environment among Georgians and instill habits of not littering and cleaning after themselves and after others as well. So taking care of Georgia, your own country, is a humble service which any citizen can provide, and I am proud and happy that this network has grown significantly. Over 10,000 volunteers have participated throughout these 4 years, 7,000 children. We have worked with over 165 schools, and it's a great pleasure to see this network grow, to see there are many legal entities and individuals. So that's where the cleaner comes from, or sorter, and it's a pleasure actually to do this. And the more time goes, the happier I am to serve. So this is what we want to demonstrate, that service is the greatest privilege and pleasure to your own country, and this is very much in line with our purpose. So this is one part of our activities, but at the same time, economy is always there, finances are always there, so you need to take care of the other side of the equation. And as I understand, the main topic is economy and finance, so let's dive into that. Thank you for the invitation.
Let's get down to business, and I'll start with geostats. very sexy figures they are publishing every month and every quarter, and 9.8% real GDP growth, as they say, year on year in the first quarter of 2025. Okay, 2024, double-digit growth, 10% something. The year before, another double-digit growth. But at the same time, we know that FDI, foreign direct investments, is at its lowest point since, I think, 2009, when there was aftermath of war and also economic crisis.
Excluding COVID years, 2 COVID years, but it's near there.
Absolutely. So I didn't count those COVID years. What else can be said? That, I mean, Georgia's government is not recognized neither internally nor externally. We see very clear signs of isolation of the country. So the Georgian government picked up fight with the United States. They are regarding European Union as an enemy, etc. And meanwhile, all this is going on, plus political instability, the regional volatility, and Georgia has 9.8% economic growth, which is indeed very sexy. I mean, and my question to you is this: is it real, or Geostat is kind of manipulating with the data? And then, if it is real, where this growth is going, because it is not felt at people's level.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Good question. I would start with the words of Professor Preobrazhensky from Mikhail Bulgakov's Dog's Heart. Don't read Soviet newspaper before your lunch. So I don't believe in these statistics. And there is so much falsehood in Georgia already. And if you look at, for example, legal system, courts, so much falsehood that how can you trust, let's say, statistics when there is so much falsehood in legal system or in the government and the prime minister? I have bet publicly that there is no 3-minute kind of speech from him when there is no lie. 3 minutes, I've been cautious, maybe 1 minute even. But I'm publicly betting if somebody wants anything, I mean, a bottle of champagne or more, we can go to cases of champagne.
Farther, so like 3 sentences, 1 sentence is a lie.
Yes. Yeah. So how can you believe this? To be more facts-based, very big portion of Georgia's GDP growth. So there could be just plain vanilla manipulation of data, which is difficult to detect, and it will be uncovered once this government is gone. However, what we can see now is some of the signs. One is a very big part of Georgia's GDP growth comes from ICT sector. So strangely, Georgia's ICT plus education sector share of the economy is 16.7%. And this is second place in the world after Ireland. I don't see how we have this kind of ICT and education sector. Second is this ICT makes up around 40% of total GDP growth in the first quarter. 40%. 40%.
Yeah.
And if you look, you cannot go deep in numbers, but there is one clear sign. Georgian government has introduced a few years ago very lenient taxation system when foreign companies can pay only 1% tax, no VAT, 1% profit tax, and key idea was to employ Georgian people in this sector and proliferate ICT education and so on. So it looks like many are using it primarily Russian companies as a loophole. So I can easily imagine companies employing just 1 or 2 people here in Georgia nominally and not paying very little taxes and doing their business elsewhere, and their account turnover goes to Georgian banks and counts as GDP growth, whereas truly it doesn't contribute anything to the Georgian economy. And this links with another factor that notwithstanding this astonishing GDP growth, Georgian authorities are struggling with tax collection. In the first half of the year, the total tax collection was supposed to be around 12 billion Lari. And they have met it with much bravado although 5 months at the end of May, they were lagging behind the target significantly. So what appears to be the case that some big part of the taxes, around 3% of total, 361 million, is recorded as other taxes. So what is other taxes? I suppose this is the case. They ask the companies to pay in advance, some of the companies where they have influence, and this is recorded as other taxes. However, these belong to the future periods. So this tax is not payable was not payable in the first half of the year, and these 361 million have to be deducted from the future payables. So let's follow the picture, and I will look at the 7 months tax collection and so on. I expect this to be widen. A year ago, 361 million was 100 million Lari. So the gap is widening, and 261 million Lari new kind of shortfall is over 2% of total target. It's not that big yet, however, it is likely to widen. So another fact, so we can kind of go to patchy data to doubt these numbers. Electricity production has fallen 5% in the first quarter, and consumption has grown only 1%. So why is it if the economy is growing? Okay, well, you can say Georgia is not that industrialized. Then import, if you exclude paintings and artworks imported by Mr. Ivanishvili, and if you exclude cars, which are mainly exported, import has grown only 1%. So if the economy again is growing 9.8%, why the import is not growing? So consumption is not growing. And also there is significant bubble in the construction sector. It's becoming increasingly evident. Prices are falling both on rental market and property prices are falling. Nominally, in primary market, sales are falling and prices are falling. Secondary. Primary market, there is a minor growth recorded in prices. However, these prices include interest because
the banking interest.
So earlier, primary properties or newly built properties were sold with mortgages. So people would borrow from banks and pay. But now most of the sales are through credit of the developers. But this credit includes interest as well. So it's deferred payments and interest to be paid by these developers elsewhere for financing it and to be earned from receivables from the buyers is included in this price. So if you record 2% price increase, but truly this interest is 10 or 15% or maybe more, then you obviously see that it's a truly reduction of prices rather than increase. So these signs clearly tell me that there is very little growth, if any, in Georgia now. And to go to the other side, how this is spread in population, this is very uneven. On one hand, Porsche sales are growing, so Porsche sales have grown 5 times since the start of the Ukraine war, 10 times, I'm sorry. So 1,200 Porsches were sold in Georgia in 2024. At the same time, and there is kind of this conspicuous consumption, at the same time, 34% of Georgians are unemployed. So around 15% are officially unemployed, and further 19% are excluded from the labor market. So there are 2 criteria, which which define whether somebody is unemployed. One has to be seeking job for last 4 weeks and should be ready to start job in the next 2 weeks. So around 19% of people are not seeking jobs because they have lost the hope to finding one. So these 19% of people are excluded from the labor market. And you can go and kind of see this data, but you need a lot of work to uncover this because our statistics again conceal this, and labor participation figure overall in Georgia is 55%. It's extremely low. So this is immediate sign that...
another way of measure it is that I think the last data, employment data is 13-something% according to Geostat. But I agree with you that the key is how they are calculating it. And if you just go and ask And the polls basically tell us that when polls ask a question like this, do you consider yourself employed or unemployed? Every third person in Tbilisi says that they are unemployed, and every second person in the rural areas tell us that they are unemployed. Of course, they are counted as employed, obviously, and I think you started explaining the technique, how they are doing it. But this is not a real unemployment figure, it's way higher. And I think that it's clear that Georgia is probably in Europe a country where the unemployment is the highest. Okay, sorry interrupting you.
The recorded unemployment,
Yeah.
however, as I say, it's very easy, well, not that easy, but it's quite possible to look at the labor participation rate and to see this concealed, people excluded from this labor market, and this is hefty 19% of the population. So this is quite painful. So this comes to kind of the question about 9.8% GDP growth.
Okay, and let's move a little bit from Georgian economy to the banking sector, financial sector, where you've been so active for the last 30 or so years. And when I looked into your biography, so you've been CEO of some of the banks, you've been a financial advisor to some of the others in Georgia, away from Georgia. So you really will understand some insight of the banking system. And in Georgia, we have two monster banks, I would call them, that control almost 80% of the Georgian financial market. And these two banks are Bank of Georgia and the TBC Bank. They both are British incorporated. They are listed on London Stock Exchange. And the other day, I was kind of checking the stock prices. And surprisingly enough, Bank of Georgia's stock rose by 50% or over 50% in the last 6 months period and almost 70% for a year. TBC Bank has similar statistics, a little bit lower, about 40% for the last 6 months and 60% year-on-year growth. But this is a very high growth, isn't it? For a stock, if you come in the American high-tech, the leaders like NVIDIA, AMD, some of the others, even they don't have such a growth. And on the other hand, what we see is that some of the reputable financial organizations like JP Morgan and BlackRock, they have, and they maintain their kind of shares in TBC Bank and Bank of Georgia shares around 5%. That tells me that the Georgian banking system is stable. Their earnings are good or even excellent compared to the other banks in United Kingdom or the United States. And then, nobody can manipulate that data. Well, about Eurostat, we can say that, well, they are manipulating the data, but well, the London Stock Exchange data or stock data that belongs to non-Georgian actors, I don't think they can be manipulated. And that clearly says that the international business does not see Georgian market or Georgian banking market, at least, are neither unstable nor falling or nor dangerous. My question to you is that, and also to adding to this, I was regularly checking these data, for example, a year ago, and when there were overwhelming the protest movements in Georgia, in a large-scale protest after the elections, 2024, and those times there were 15% fall or even 20% fall of those stock. So my question to you is that why? I've got nothing against the Georgian bank stock growing. I think that's cool, but why is it going that way? We say that, well, the economy is not growing in real terms. Georgia, we've got political instability, we've got isolation that is growing very fast. We've got very clear signs and dictatorship is being consolidated. And at the same time, banking sector is thriving. So what's going on here?
I would point out several factors contributing to the story that you are speaking about. Firstly, from my viewpoint, there are clear signs of froth on the international stock markets, to speak with the terminology of Alan Greenspan. And we know that from time to time, markets can lose the sight of reality, and there are increasing signs of this nowadays. So let's see how it goes, but I'm in the camp which believes that stock markets are likely to fall. I don't know the timing, it's very difficult, nobody should try to do it, but August is from time to time a difficult month for the stock market. Let's see. Now let's come back to the Georgian situation. I would divide it into two parts. Firstly, these banks, two particular banks, have a strong history of growth and delivering stable earnings. They are highly profitable. Bank of Georgia has over 30% return on equity. TBC also has very high return on equity. They control 80% of the market, and in some aspects over 90%. They are a clear duopoly, and which gives them a lot of pricing power. So in certain parts of the market, it's evident. For example, loans are more pricey in higher amounts.
And the profit margins are higher, obviously, yes.
Than an SME lending, for example. Leaving aside kind of the regulatory issues, these banks are highly profitable, professionally built, organized, and this high market share also contributes to a kind of stably high earnings. At the same time, I would emphasize three factors which put their stock valuations in question. One is political factors in Georgia. So they are standing on a ground. So if this is a solid rocky ground, then everything looks pretty nice. If this is a quicksand, things look very much diametrically opposite. So I don't know where is it exactly, or I would rather not point exactly where it is between a rock and quicksand. However, it's somewhere in between. And so political factors, I mean, this country is seriously politically unstable and I would say declining very visibly. There is flood of market with information, so I'm not surprised that international investors who own most of the stocks overlook it. There is so much information and there are articles about it in everywhere, Financial Times, Bloomberg, elsewhere, economists, that maybe this is deliberate, maybe so, but this is new informational overwhelmed age. So this could be contributing to overlooking some factors, and political instability in Georgia could be one of those. Macro factors, again, we spoke about just now about 9.8% GDP growth. At the same time, IMF recently published a very rosy report about Georgian economy.
7.3%.
So when asked about it, my answer is this: something is rotten in the state of Denmark. As simple as that. So I would not go into macro, but I just explained my serious doubts about Georgian numbers, reported numbers. And there are governance issues as well. I would keep this information to myself, but this is public information, my observations. And I believe that there are weaknesses in each of these factors: macroeconomic, political, governance issues. Therefore, I am seeking partners to short these stocks. So this is my simple answer. Let's see how it goes, whether they decline before I find my partners, or I find my partners and we benefit together. And I'm not trying to deliberately undermine anything. This is my belief, and I put my mouth where my money where my mouth is. So I expect, for example, that Lari is going to decline. I have shorted Lari long ago and have said publicly. And same about these stocks. So this is what I believe in. At the same time, I may be wrong, and let's see what happens. So this is my opinion, and I'm watching it with interest and trying to put my bet.
Interesting. So again, and one of the reasons I asked you this question is because nobody wants to just undermine Bank of Georgia or TBC Bank or banking system in Georgia. We all depend on that. But it is a kind of signal to me that kind of instability inside the country is not that. Or it doesn't seem that dangerous from the stock market perspective, right? And I always trust more stock markets than the political statements, because the stock market reflects politics very neutrally. And if there was a kind of very volatile, the plummeting of the stocks of these two companies, it would tell me that things are really shaky here. But because they are stable, and not just stable, but because they're growing, that tells me that, the ground is still quite solid. Maybe tomorrow that will change, and you might be right there. But I have one more question about the banks, and then we'll move on. My question is about, I'll be very honest here, I'm really disappointed about these two banks, and I'll explain why. They are clearly pro-Western. Every year they produce those famous video clips, and they, in those video clips they showed their kind of political direction, and they are so clearly pro-Western, kind of pro-democracy, etc. But when it is really helping or funding democracy in this country, they are very, very economical about that. And we all remember when there was crackdown on demonstrations, large-scale demonstrations, and the fines were issued, exorbitant fines to some of those demonstrators. Bank of Georgia and TBC Bank allocated 2.5 million Lari each to help Georgia's westernization or Western orientation. To be honest, I don't know where this money did go. And nobody talked about that. But on the other hand, when we are looking, as you mentioned, that these two banks control 80% of the banking market, it means that they also freeze 80% of the accounts that belong to Georgian democratic forces. And these are Western banks that we mentioned that they are British incorporated, and the Britain, United Kingdom, and United States and European Union very clearly state that the court in Georgia is politicized. Court decisions are political leverage in the hands of the Georgian de facto government to punish democratic forces. And they are still implementing those orders to punish the democratic forces in Georgia. But at the same time, they say that we support democracy in Georgia, we support Georgia's European path, etc., etc. But in practice, they do the opposite. So my question to you is, as a banker, that do they have any leverage to push back on the decisions that they deem to be political, that is coming from prosecutor's office or courts or etc., and use the international leverage they have to push back on the government and simply say that, we are not going to do that because the entire world does not recognize it as a fair decision from the court, but it is a political decision to punish your political opponents or people that are opposing you?
I would step back before I answer this question about the previous point. I would caution any investors in Georgian stocks about thinking that it's okay to turn Georgia into an extractive economy, Russian style. Georgia's wealth and Georgian stocks, revenue of those companies are heavily dependent on Georgia being an inclusive economy, diversified and inclusive in a sense that the markets were quite predictable, rule of law was more or less upheld, and there was more or less level playing field for the businesses. This is changing very rapidly, and if these kind of changes or they have been always like this are okay for some countries like Russia or maybe Kazakhstan. I don't want to kind of portray Kazakhstan in a negative way. However, Kazakhstan is halfway between extractive and inclusive economies from my viewpoint. But Georgia cannot afford it. We don't have natural wealth and resources. The only wealth that Georgia has is maybe its land and water, and I don't think Georgian people will allow wholesale or retail sale of Georgia's land as a resource to foreigners, which could be on the mind of these authorities. Otherwise, there are no resources which would sustain an extractive economy in Georgia. So fundamentally, it seems impossible to sustain economy and any kind of profitable business, significantly profitable business in an extractive economy over longer term. So growth is under question mark. Also provisions in these banks are at very low. If you look at the questions or clouds on the real estate sector, for example, or any durable assets growth or means of production sales, I would question very much the growth prospects. Now coming to this question, I have a big dose of criticism to the CEOs of these banks, and they know about it. And I would not go more kind of in length, but I'm not happy about the balance of their allegiance to the liberal democracy and the true rule of law, spirit of law rather than the letter, and on the other hand, the letter of law. So from the letter of law, they have to give the Caesar what is Caesar's. So they have to comply with the court orders. At the same time, the spirit of law is very much broken. So I don't think they can do much about this exactly legal aspect. However, I expect way more from these institutions in terms of their contribution to the civic freedom in Georgia, generally, standards of, let's say, contributing between 0.5 to 2% of their net profit to charitable activities could be okay for the Western institutions. However, Georgian banks, I'm referring to early 20th century when Georgia was under Russian Empire even. Banks owned by Georgian nobility were contributing way more to Georgia, and overall a poor country like Georgia, and country where democracy and not just democracy as a kind of abstract concept, but truly this tyranny or autocracy is entering daily lives of the people. Doing this much, from my perspective, is not enough, and these kind of institutions which command 80% of the market share and make over $1 billion net profit in a poor country, actually net profit of these banks is every $7th or more is earned by these banks in Georgia. So I expect more from them. As simple as this.
Obviously, a lot of other people expect more from them, and I think that it's high time they also thought about it, because in a dictatorship, so they can't really continue earning or being on the stock market on the rise, Because again, as you mentioned, that Georgia is not an extractive economy, it's an inclusive economy, and you cannot possibly continue being an inclusive economy in a dictatorship, where in which direction we are clearly going. So the next question that I want to kind of manage to put as much questions as possible before the time runs out is Lari, because again there was certain volatility of the Georgian national currency a year ago when there were big protests outside, when there was the elections and the post-election period, but at some point, Lari got stabilized, and it is fairly stable for the last few months. Even if you compare it to the US dollar, British pound volatility, which is there, the Lari is surprisingly stable. So why is this? Because it is naturally stable, because it is kind of economy is getting closed and it is because of that, or because the National Bank of Georgia is spending its currency resources on the market to stabilize Lari, or there is something else that we don't see?
It's a good question. So I mentioned I have shorted Lari.
Yeah.
It's not as much for financial gain, but as much as to put my money where my mouth is. So let's go and break down the situation. In many ways, a stable Lari is following the US dollar. So US dollar has fallen against euro and a basket of currencies. So Lari has fallen. So it has helped to let some steam out. But to see the broader picture, let's break down. Let's look at the balance of payment, external account. So our current account has traditionally been in deficit, and it was always compensated through capital flows. These days, current account deficit has narrowed significantly, but it is still in deficit. Why it has narrowed? Firstly, since visa liberalization started, which means visa-free access to the European Union, remittances from the European Union have increased 4 times. So every year, Georgia receives around $3 billion of remittances, dollars, from abroad, Georgians living abroad. And out of this $3 billion, 45% is from the EU and Britain. And other sources, United States have also, remittances have increased because there has been a lot of illegal immigration of Georgians. For example, I know tens of policemen, well-trained policemen, who have crossed Mexican border to emigrate there, and so on. So these remittances have grown, and this $3 billion is numbers quadrupled when referred to European Union in the 7 years. So it's a very big number. Stepping back, Georgia traditionally runs a big trade deficit, but how it is compensated? So one source is remittances. Second is rise of re-export since the start of the war in Ukraine. So Georgia's re-export of cars have increased from $500 million in 2021 to $2.6 billion, to $2.6 billion in 2024. This is a huge, staggering number. And most of the export goes to Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan. These countries do not consume this much cars. Armenia, so most likely most of this re-export goes truly to Russia. And I suspect there are some other flows to Russia which feeds Georgia's current account. So the money profits from this are contributing to stability of Lari. Third factor is tourism. So Georgia has a good climate, and it's a beneficiary of global warming in some ways. So heat is rising in other countries, and we clearly, I've been observing this. I don't have any scientific numbers, but I've been observing that Georgia is becoming actually cooler in summers, more humid, more rainy, and if even today, if you look, mountains around Tbilisi are green, brown, green, whereas if the mountains were a little bit even green by the end of June, that was a big achievement. It's the end of July. Never we have seen this kind of lush kind of grass around Tbilisi.
Even in Tbilisi, if you see, it's a kind of a lot greener than it used to when I remember when I was a kid, for example.
And it accumulated, over years. Georgia has become a touristic destination. Now European tourism is declining, Asian is growing, per capita is probably contributing less, but nevertheless there is inflow. So tourism, re-export, and remittances balance the trade deficit, and current and capital flows are still positive, and mostly over 90% of capital flows are actually reinvestment. So for example, profit of these big banks, which we were talking about, are reinvested. So not all the profits are paid as dividends. That makes kind of capital account positive. However, there are many reasons why I think that capital account may actually turn negative. Also because of the instability, political instability, macroeconomic factors that I described. So this picture does not leave me. If you remember cartoons, for example, Tom and Jerry, Jerry runs or Tom runs out of a cliff and he's continuing running in the open air until he realizes that he's in the air. So this is kind of a situation, and I think there could be an abrupt fall. And also, Georgian banking sector is heavily dollarized. Share of loans and deposits are over 90%, over 70% in foreign currency. So if the confidence is hit, there is a big likelihood people running to convert their Lari deposits into dollars, and companies, and also companies converting their foreign currency borrowings into Laris. I have seen this in other markets. Georgia was on the verge of currency collapse in November last year. I believe there was a real manipulation of the market. I cannot speak that openly about it, but I've seen some facts of manipulation. And the fact that Georgian central bank is kind of on propaganda spree about strength of Lari, and they regularly portray they have purchased this much currency, tells me that they want to show it kind of signal stability and so on. However, somehow the number of purchases is way bigger than the actual growth of Georgian foreign exchange reserves. So there has been some growth of foreign exchange reserves. However, around $800 million dollars from the lows of last year. However, around $500 million came from the increased minimum reserve requirements from the banks. So this is banks' money taken by the central bank. They can do it, but the Turkish central bank was doing this kind of gimmicks for a long time until lira plummeted big time, and investors know what has happened to lira. So this is a kind of similar story. Georgian refinancing rate, key rate of the central bank, is way lower than the market rate, and that causes a very big level of central bank loans to commercial banks, which is another sign. And when we speak about reserves, this is high summer tourism season. Winter is going to come when Georgia starts buying fuel. So current account will become, gap will increase. Also, Georgia has a big liability to refinance, $500 million of bond maturing in April next year, and another very big hidden liability, which is a lost lawsuit to Enka, a Turkish power construction company. So the Georgian government lost $380 million to Enka around a year ago, and as I understand, this amount is nearing execution. So should be claimed, but meanwhile this amount accrues high interest. It's SOFR plus 4, which is around 8.5% yield. Yield of Georgian sovereign bonds is 5%. Georgian government knows that this amount is payable and there is no escape from it. So a rational someone would have paid it because this is a very high interest rate. So if things are so good, why they are not paying this $430 or $450 million to Enka, which is certainly due soon. So it looks like lies or untruths will be uncovered in reasonably soon. And I caution any viewers of this podcast to think more carefully about data of the Georgian economy.
Interesting. So my last question is about a little bit, not what is happening now, but let's look ahead and what will happen to Georgian economy in medium or long run if Ivanishvili sustains power. If this is the situation that we have, it continues. Georgia is run by illegitimate government that is not recognized neither internally nor externally. The protest continues. Isolation kind of becomes stronger. Again, now we have a real danger of the visa-free travel to get suspended, and if that happens, it will be followed by suspension of the association agreement and the DCFTA. Of course, Rukhadze said that just means visa lines, and it can be good for Georgian economy and employment because less people will leave Georgia and go abroad. But in reality, a lot of people understand that it's not just about free movement. It can have dire economic consequences. And my question to you is this: that if this happens, if the trend continues, what will happen to Georgian economy in medium and long run?
Let's come back to the extractive versus inclusive economy. As I mentioned, Georgia does not have a game to build an extractive economy. It can turn into like Transnistria style or Abkhazia, which is a breakaway region largely controlled by Russians, economy, which is pretty ugly, and it could be probably sustained in some way on smuggling and illegal flows and so on, selling of Georgian land and water and kind of natural resources to shady businesses and so on. Maybe you can house here hundreds of thousands of foreigners which are suffering from global warming and so on. I think this kind of vision would not be liked by Georgian population, and
and most importantly, what will be the effect of this? What we are talking about on a regular Georgian? Interrupting you there.
So this kind of scenario is only possible if Georgia turns into North Korea or Iran or Russia style complete tyranny. I don't think this is feasible because most of the supporters of the de facto authorities will turn against it if it goes this way, because deep inside most of the people who are kind of on the balance and don't protest somehow believe that this terrible scenario won't materialize. But the more time goes, the more visible this scenario becomes. So I don't expect this to happen. Nevertheless, there is a big room for further deterioration. Let's look at so Georgia now is in decline, and this will accelerate. So the superficial or surface-based growth and numbers will soon turn red, and or red or ugly, black. And the more time goes, the more it's going to deteriorate until we return to the EU and Rustavelian, which is Knight in the Panther's kind of our Georgian roots. So Europe is the Georgia's natural destination, and until we get back to that route, we will be declining. So now let's consider the time until we get there. We do a U-turn again back towards Europe. We reversed actually the U-turn that these authorities started in 2023 and then continued with rigged elections and so on. So let's just concentrate on visa-free. I've spoken about other aspects earlier. So Georgia, flows from European Union and Britain to Georgia are $1.5 billion. This is official remittances. On top of that, around $0.5 billion are coming as cash or through cards, which are Western issued cards, but held physically by relatives of Georgian emigres living in Georgia. So this is kind of an easier way that people give their relatives their cards and they withdraw cash here or use these cards. So banking sector records these cards as expenditure of foreign tourists, but truly this is Georgian emigres' money. So around $2 billion come from the West. This is around 6% of our GDP, which is a huge number. So if visa-free access to European Union is terminated, it will be dented. This number will be dented very much. There are some mitigating factors and time also in time. Firstly, some European countries would be keen to maintain Georgian seasonal workers and general employed people. So they would possibly make visas easy to obtain, but nevertheless it's a cost, it's time and it's uncertainty. So there will be some issues with numbers of Georgians traveling to the West and earning money, sending back. Second, another mitigating factor is probably the fact that official employment of Georgians in the West has doubled from 75,000 in 2016 to 150,000 last year. So again, some money will continue flowing. And third factor is that some of the Georgians will move from the European Union to other countries, like Dubai and Persian Gulf, maybe Turkey, maybe even Russia. It's easy to say they will move. It's quite a pain to move from the EU to these countries. Nevertheless, some will move, but this has to do with the fate of people, and there will be a lot of unhappiness about it. But also, going beyond the monetary terms, I don't know how much exactly of this 2 billion will be impacted, but it will be a big impact. 6% of GDP is big. Also, it's cash money coming to Georgia versus general GDP growth. If we dig holes, or if we build buildings which will never be sold, it is still GDP growth. I have my doubts about this construction industry, but nevertheless, this cash coming to Georgia contributes further points of GDP because it is spent and it feeds some other commerce and so on. On top of that, Georgia's attractiveness of some sectors in Georgia was very much underpinned by its European path. For example, real estate prices. Georgia was considered as kind of open market moving towards European Union. So there were clear expectations that once Georgia goes up the accession path, the price of real estate will increase, which has happened in accession countries to the European Union. However,
and in Georgia too, because I mean, when we were on the path, there were kind of property prices almost doubled.
Exactly. So now there is a U-turn on that. So attractiveness of Georgian assets is falling dramatically. So there are numerous factors suggesting that Georgian assets prices are already undermined, and it would become more noticeable, more clear to the investors, international investors, and I believe this will be reflected in their valuations.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting to talk, but the time is against us. So anything you would like to add to the podcast? Otherwise, we would call it a day.
George, I appreciate this interview. I believe that Georgian people have enough internal strength and understanding of the true situation, that they would defy the nihilism which is seen daily by the authorities and propaganda machine. And I believe that we would find our internal strength to tell this regime, go home.
Thank you, and thank you for watching us, for listening to us. Please like us, subscribe to us. Talk Georgia will take a summer break in August and will come back in September on independent YouTube channel. Thank you.